Bonnie Dages had just turned 18 and had a 4-month-old son whom she adored. She worked as a live-in nanny so she could spend more time with her baby, Jeremy, and had big plans for her future. An inheritance that she received on her 18th birthday was going to help her build a life for her and her son. But, as Bonnie soon found, when people in your life discover that you have money, they start coming out of the woodwork to ask for it. Bonnie only had this money for about a month before she withdrew $15,000 in cash and vanished. In this small town where everyone knows everyone else, a pool of suspects emerged. But 30 years later, Bonnie and Jeremy's case remains unsolved. When a person goes missing, there's a special kind of pain in the not knowing. I want to tell you the stories of those who never came home. Today, I want to tell you the story of Bonnie and Jeremy Dages. I'm Kona Gallagher.
And I'm Ethan Flick.
And this is And Then They Were Gone. Welcome back, everyone.
Welcome back.
Thank you for joining us once again. I'm Kona Gallagher.
And I'm Ethan Flick.
And we're the husband and wife team behind this podcast. Each week, I tell you the story of an unsolved missing persons case. Ethan doesn't know anything about this going into the episode, and he's here to provide his reactions and questions in real time, hopefully asking some of the same ones you have at home. Getting into this case, I feel like I start a lot of these episodes with like, this case is infuriating or some derivation of that. But yeah, it is. And a lot of them are. And this one in particular is wild because a mother and her 4-month-old baby vanished. And the story didn't really make it outside of the Tampa, Florida area.
Really?
Yeah, like it got no national attention whatsoever. It was barely even a regional story, honestly.
Is this going to be another case where they're just assuming that she's starting her life over?
Yeah, I mean, they definitely did think that at first. That was certainly one of the possibilities, but it kind of became pretty clear to them early on that likely was not the case. And like I said in the intro, I mean, we do have some suspects, but we're 30 years into it and it remains unsolved.
Well, now I've got questions.
Already?
Yeah. But I'll pause.
Okay.
I'll hold off.
Okay. It was weird when I was researching this case because even now, there have been many articles written about it, but they all have the same basic information. And so usually when I'm researching these episodes, I don't listen to other true crime podcasts who have done the same case because, and you're not really involved in the podcasting world, so you don't know this. There have been some plagiarism issues with some true crime podcasts. And I don't even want to inadvertently get mixed up in any of that. So I just try to stay away. But in this case, the podcast Unfound did a really long interview in 2018 with Bonnie's mother. And it is one of the very few places that I've seen really get into deep details. And it's a 2-hour episode.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. So between this and a 2019 press conference that she did, Linda, Bonnie's mother did, that's actually where a lot of the basis of this episode comes from. So I just want to make that very clear up front. But as always, we do put our sources in our blog post about this episode. So you can see that there. We'll have this podcast linked. So if you want to listen to the full 2-hour interview with Bonnie's mom, I highly recommend that you do that. Okay. But before we get started, we have a few new members over on Patreon. We have the Felvey family, Lindsay M, and Chandra. So thank you, all three of you, so
Or
much for your support.
However many there
Are in the family.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you. As a reminder, you can get these episodes early and ad-free by joining us over on Patreon at any level. You can also listen ad-free by subscribing to our premium edition on Apple Podcasts, starting at just $2.99 a month. And you get a discount if you pay by the year. All the business out of the way, let's get started with the disappearance of Bonnie and Jeremy Dages. Bonnie Lee Dages was born on March 12, 1975 in Brandon, Florida to Linda and Larry Dages. Linda was young when Bonnie was born, around 20, and she went on to have 4 more children after Bonnie, so Bonnie was the oldest of 5. The family lived in a modest 3-bedroom, 1-bath ranch-style home in Lithia, Florida. The house, however, was on 3 acres. So while the house was
Did you say
small,
1 bath for 7 people?
Yes.
Wow.
I know. It was tough. But it was on 3 acres and they had horses.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah. So didn't have a lot of space inside, plenty of space outside. They did have horses, and Bonnie just grew up adoring horses and riding. And she also was involved in the local equestrian scene growing up. So apparently a lot of people in this area have horses. It's a thing. Bonnie had a pretty typical small town life growing up. She got along well with her parents for the most part. Linda, her mom, said that she and her father, Larry, had some kind of issues growing up. But, it sounds like it was all kind of pretty typical, like maybe teenage headbutting type situations. But by the time that this is taking place, everybody was cool. They were fine, it sounds like. And, she got along relatively well with her siblings. But again, it's 5 siblings in a small house. I'm sure there were also a lot of fights and arguments and things like that. But it sounds like, a happy family, good situation. According to her mother, Linda, Bonnie was really smart too, but she didn't love school. It just she wasn't a great student because it just didn't interest her. Really. But certain subjects did, and she would excel in English, for instance, and she particularly enjoyed poetry. She was an imaginative girl who was outgoing and was one of those people who never met a stranger. She would just talk to anyone. It sounds like Bonnie stayed out of trouble for the most part during her teenage years. I'm sure there's, normal teenage stuff, but Bonnie doesn't say that there was anything, truly worrisome. Until Bonnie was 17 and became pregnant. She had apparently been seeing a boy down the street, but he and his family denied that he could be the father. According to them, he was medically incapable of fathering a child.
Okay.
Yeah, Bonnie,
how?
I don't know. She didn't get into details.
All right.
But according to them, it was not physically possible for him to be the father. From what it sounds like, Bonnie definitely did believe that he was, but perhaps couldn't be 100% sure. For whatever reason, Bonnie and her family didn't really push the issue of paternity, and they just kind of moved on with their lives. So a DNA test was never done, nothing like that. Bonnie's baby was due to be born about halfway through her senior year of high school, which would have made completing the school year difficult,
right,
as you can imagine.
Yeah.
But, she didn't want to drop out or anything like that. So she was able to take GED classes. And a couple of weeks before her son was born, she was able to complete those, take the test, and then she received her GED, which for those of you not in the States, it's a general equivalency diploma. I think the G is for general, but in any case, it's an alternative high school diploma. So she is considered a high school graduate. She just didn't go about it in the traditional route.
I mean, good for her for following through.
Well, yeah, and getting it all locked down before Jeremy was born.
Right.
And so on December 13th, 1992, Jeremy Dages was born. Now, despite her young age, Bonnie was thrilled to become a mother. Linda described Bonnie as attentive and said that she took really good care of Jeremy. As a new mother who was now out of high school, Bonnie was ready to assert her independence and start a new phase in her life. And I'm sure, get out of that house because she needed space, physical space. As it happened, there was a young couple who lived nearby who needed help. This family, the Creeches, had 2 sons. One was about a year and a half old, and the other was born just about a month after Jeremy. Soon after the second baby was born, the mother, Anna, broke her arm, so she was having trouble caring for the children. As I was saying that, I just made a connection with something that I found out later in the research process.
Okay.
That's really bumming me out right now, but that's going to come like at the end of our story. So yeah, that's weird. All right. Yeah. So the mom has a broken arm and a toddler and an infant, definitely need some help. So it's decided that Bonnie and Jeremy would move in and Bonnie would help take care of the children while the husband, Mike Creech, was at work.
Makes sense.
Absolutely. The situation seemed like a win-win for everyone. So in the spring of 1993, Bonnie and Jeremy moved into a small room in the Creech residence, which was just a few miles from her childhood home. So she was still nearby, was still checking in and everything, but, was moving on with her life.
Right. Had her own space.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Around this time, on March 12th, 1993, Bonnie turned 18. This birthday was a big deal, not just because it meant that Bonnie was legally an adult, but because it also meant that she would receive an inheritance that had been kept in a trust. This inheritance was from Bonnie's great-grandmother. It consisted of nearly $50,000 and a small piece of land in Missouri.
Wow. That's a lot.
Yeah. And I guess she had known about it because it was in this trust. And, but it definitely came at a good time considering that she just had a baby.
Yeah.
Obviously that's a lot of money now. And
right.
Imagine if you're 18 in small town Florida in the early 90s, like that is a lot of money.
Right. And who's to say how much she could get for the other property if she decided to sell it or maybe move there.
Yeah. And I think moving there was one of the things she was considering. And I do know that she had told Linda that she wanted to take a trip out there to just see the piece of land, and just, I guess, get an idea of where it was and things like that. So she was kind of planning around that, but hadn't made any final decisions. And, this whole thing with the Creeches, it wasn't supposed to be a permanent thing. It was they were both kind of helping each other out. It was just a temporary arrangement. She wanted to buy a home of her own, whether in Florida or, on this piece of land. And she wanted to create a life for her and her son. Despite the fact that she was only 18, it does seem that Bonnie had a pretty good head on her shoulders. She didn't go out and spend a bunch of money and buy crazy things as soon as she got it. In fact, her first major purchase was incredibly practical and boring. She bought a minivan, and not even a new one, a used minivan.
Oh, I was going to say those can get pretty expensive.
Yeah, this was not. Yeah, she didn't go out and buy a Mazda Miata or something else a teenage girl in the early 90s probably would have wanted. She bought a 1986 Dodge Caravan that she spent $2,500 for.
Oh my God, I think my mom had a 1986 Dodge Caravan.
Bonnie's was silver. But as I alluded to in the intro, just because Bonnie wasn't interested in blowing her money doesn't mean that other people weren't. Now, let's just get some clarity around the timeline here real quick. Jeremy was born in December 1992 when Bonnie was 17. She turned 18 on March 12, 1993, which is when she received this money. According to Linda's interview on Unfound, that's right around the time that Bonnie also started working for the Creech family. She believes that Bonnie only had that job for about a month before her disappearance. So she said it could have been as many as 2 months, but she really thinks it was only about a month. She bought the van shortly after receiving the money, so I'd guess she got that mid to late March.
Okay.
But shortly after this, very quickly after Bonnie received this money, relatives of the Creeches came to ask to borrow money to buy a truck. And this is very confusing because, this is all coming from Linda, right? And she's like talking about this 20 plus years later. So she didn't really remember all of the details, but it was apparently supposed to be like some sort of business deal. So they showed Bonnie the title for the truck and was like, yes, see, it's a truck that we want to buy. Like, this is a real thing. But Bonnie, I don't know, it just seemed strange to her, I guess. So she went to her dad, Larry, was like, hey, these people are asking for money. They want to buy this truck, blah, blah, blah. He apparently looked up the information that was on the title and found that the truck had actually been junked, like it was wrecked or totaled or whatever.
Well, yeah, I was a little confused as to why they would have a title of the truck.
Yeah, again, this, like I said, this is all kind of secondhand information coming 25 years later, so I don't know. But the point is that it seemed to be some sort of scam, just not a legit thing. And so Bonnie luckily realized this with the help of her father and didn't give them any money.
That's good.
Yeah, but it's just interesting that it happened so quickly and it was related, people who are related to her employers, basically.
Yeah.
Linda only knows that this even happened because Bonnie went to Larry to ask for advice. So there could have been more instances of people in Bonnie's life who had tried to hit her up for money that, Linda just was not aware of. Because again, her daughter's living outside of the house at this point. They're close, but Bonnie doesn't necessarily tell her every single thing that happens, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I would be inclined to believe that that's the case because if the sister of the family she's working for and her boyfriend felt comfortable enough to ask her for money, I imagine that people who are actually closer to her probably did as well.
Yeah. I'm sure members of her family.
Yeah, I mean, who knows? So this is where we are in the days and weeks leading up to her disappearance. Bonnie is navigating being a new mother with a new job and a new living situation while having come into a large sum of money. What Linda and the rest of Bonnie's family didn't know at the time was that she was also navigating a secret relationship. On April 28th, 1993, Bonnie went to her family's home and borrowed a couple of her siblings to help her clean her van. After they were done, she brought them back home, and Linda returned home from work at around 2 p.m. Linda then took Jeremy in Bonnie's van, because that's where the car seat was, and they went down to a nearby ball field to pick up one of Bonnie's sisters who was working there. And then, Linda says that they stayed and showed off the baby to everyone. And, it's just a normal little afternoon, right? So they all came back to the house after that. And then Bonnie and Jeremy left and returned to the Creeches. But that was the last time that Bonnie's family would ever see her. To them, it was a completely normal day. Bonnie seemed like her usual self. Nothing seemed off at all. To the Dages family, though, the one thing that seemed slightly strange about that day didn't necessarily have anything to do with Bonnie. It happened before she came over. Earlier in the day, while Linda was still at work, a man named Terry Christie came by with his business partner. They owned a lawn care company in town. Now, Larry knew these men, mainly because it was a small town and everybody seems to know everybody there. The Dages family was actually close with Terry's brother, who was a neighbor and had kids around the same age as their kids. So basically, Christy and the Dages family were family friends, but they weren't particularly close with Terry. They were close with his brother.
Yeah.
According to Linda, Terry had maybe stopped by one other time ever, but it wasn't a thing.
Yeah, but either way, they knew.
Yeah, they knew who he was, but it was it was weird that he just popped by,
Mm-hmm.
And they apparently just talked about the horses and just had a general conversation about nothing, really. They didn't even seem to have much of a purpose for coming over. They just came and looked at horses and chit-chatted for a while and then left. At the time, it was kind of a little weird, but nothing strange or overtly sinister. So, had Bonnie not disappeared, it's probably something that they never would have thought of again.
Right.
But it's something to keep in mind given what happens later. So the next morning is April 29th. Anna Creech and her sister-in-law go over to the Dages house. Linda was at work again, but Larry was home. They asked Larry if he had seen Bonnie. He hadn't since yesterday afternoon. But Anna wasn't asking in a way that was like nervous or worried or whatever. You know, it was just casual, like, oh, hey, have you seen Bonnie today? He's like, no, she came over yesterday. Haven't seen her today, though. And so they're like, okay, cool. Well, no biggie. We'll, catch up with her. We'll catch up with her later. And they left. It seems as though Bonnie should have been working at that point in the day.
Yeah, right. That's what I was thinking was like they were coming over to say, hey, have you seen Bonnie? She's supposed to be up and like
and maybe
helping take care of these kids.
But again, the way Linda's describing it, it just didn't throw up any red flags for Larry. So I don't know. Like nobody seemed concerned, so he wasn't concerned either. A few hours later, however, they came back and told Larry that they hadn't told him the whole truth. That the reason they were looking for Bonnie is because she hadn't come home the night before. And they were actually worried.
Tell me again when the last time was, time of day that they saw Bonnie.
So I'm not exactly sure when the last time the Creeches saw Bonnie was, but when the Dages family saw Bonnie, it was the last time they saw her was probably like 3 p.m.-ish.
Okay.
Give or take. Because Linda got home from work around 2.
Mm-hmm.
And then they went to the ball field and did all that stuff.
Yeah.
So I would guess around 3 p.m.
Okay.
On the 28th. So whether Bonnie went home and then left again, which I think is what it sounds like happened, nobody had seen her since the previous evening. Once Anna and her sister-in-law come back and, tell Larry this, he obviously does start to get worried. So this is around the time again where Linda comes home from work. And so she gets home, Larry tells her what's going on, and they decided to call the sheriff's department and report Bonnie missing.
Do we know why the Creeches lied about it the first time? Or omitted?
I think what it sounds like is they were just hoping that Bonnie spent the night at her family's house. And so they didn't want to make it a big deal if it wasn't, kind of thing. And, I kind of mentioned the secret relationship. I think they were also trying to give her privacy.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
I think they were still trying to see if they could just find her before they alerted anyone and made people panic. So, of course, when they called the sheriff's department, they had a hard time getting anyone to come out and take a report. After all, Bonnie was 18 and it had been less than 24 hours since she was last seen. The Dageses did manage to convince them, however, so a deputy was sent out. And it just so happened that, again, small town, they had met this deputy before and he knew who Bonnie was. They weren't friends or anything, but he was aware of who she was.
Uh-huh.
So he stayed there, took his statements, wrote stuff down, and then went over to the Creeches to talk to them. But apparently, he didn't actually file a missing persons report.
So he just took down information and didn't do anything with it? Or
that's what it sounds like, yeah. The next day, he went on vacation for 4 days, and nobody could get in touch with him. Because, it's 93, so nobody had cell phones. So if he's on vacation, he's on vacation. So nobody could reach him for 4 days. And it definitely created an issue in the early investigation, as you can imagine. And so anyway, so the Dageses only found out that he didn't write a report and that he was on vacation because the next day they called the sheriff's department again to follow up and see what was going on. And they had no idea what they were talking about.
So he didn't even file an incident report or anything?
It doesn't sound like it. I mean, from what Linda says, she's they called the sheriff's department. They were just who's missing? What?
What the hell?
Yeah. So now it's closer to 48 hours after Bonnie was last seen.
Right.
And they're starting from scratch.
Mm.
And despite all of this, they still had to really work to convince the sheriff's department to send anybody out. Now, eventually, I think because Jeremy was with her is the only reason that they did.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And 2 detectives were sent out to talk to the family. But, when the detectives arrived, they weren't treating it as a foul play situation. They were treating it as a runaway. And
well, it's not even a runaway because she's 18.
Well, exactly, right? They're like, she can leave. Like, her van's gone.
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
Like, she left. Like,
big whoop.
Leave her alone, you know? So that's kind of how they're treating it. But they're like, you know, well, let's appease the parents or whatever. And so during this process, as they're talking to the investigators and as the investigators are now talking to the Creeches again, Linda and Larry start to find out about some of the secrets that their daughter had been keeping. Now, Linda and Larry didn't find this out at the time, but on the first night that Bonnie and Jeremy were reported missing, when that original deputy went to go talk to the Creeches, they told him that on the night of the 28th, Bonnie was going to meet her boyfriend in the Cash and Carry parking lot.
All right.
And Cash and Carry is a grocery store chain. And the one that she was going to was in Brandon, Florida. They're in Lithia, Florida, but it's like 5-6 miles away.
Okay.
So that was the last thing that Bonnie had told them, but then she never came back. And so again, you know, back to your earlier question, I think that kind of is why Anna was maybe so like cagey with Larry at first, because she knew that this was a secret relationship. So she didn't want to be like, oh yeah, Bonnie was going out to meet her boyfriend and never came back.
Do we know why this is a secret relationship?
Not really. Like,
I mean, was he like older, or was it like?
It's definitely shady. We'll get into it, but it's the whole thing's weird. And so Linda and Larry are just like, what is happening? Like, who is this guy she's seeing? Why is she meeting him at a parking lot at 9:00 at night? Like, what is happening? You know, like, I'm sure this is all surprising and confusing, but Bonnie was an adult and she didn't have to tell her parents every detail of her love life. However, once they found out who the secret boyfriend was, they were absolutely shocked. According to the Creeches, the man who Bonnie had been seeing was Terry Christie.
Oh.
The friend of the family who randomly came over to the Dages house on the afternoon of the 28th. And at the time, Terry was 39 years old, which is about how old Linda was.
Oh, yikes.
Yeah.
Okay.
As the Creeches spoke more about this relationship to police and the Dageses, they began to paint a disturbing picture. Terry Christie wasn't married or anything, but he did allegedly insist that Bonnie kept their relationship a secret. And this could be due to like their general age difference because, you know, Bonnie had just turned 18 and this dude was over twice her age. But Linda also later found indications in Bonnie's journal that the relationship had started when Bonnie was 17.
Okay.
So when you are a 39-year-old dude dating an underage girl, you can understand why he would probably want some secrecy around that.
Yeah.
According to the Creeches, Bonnie would walk to Terry's house at night and then come back to their house early in the morning, like before everybody got up. She didn't do this every night or anything, like maybe once or twice a week, but it's assumed that she walked instead of driving so that no one would see her minivan in front of his house.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So why was Bonnie meeting Terry at the Cash and Carry that night?
Yes, that was my next question.
Exactly. And, you know,
he has his own home.
But again, doesn't like to see her van, her van there. So maybe it was just like, let's meet in a public place where it's not weird if somebody sees both of our cars there.
I guess.
But the reason why they were meeting specifically is because Bonnie was going to loan him money. But we're not talking a few bucks. We're not talking even $2,500 for some made-up truck.
Yeah.
$15,000 is what he asked her for.
Okay.
And it's what she agreed to give him. Apparently, Terry wanted to open a restaurant and wanted Bonnie to invest in this restaurant.
And $15,000 is what he thought he needed?
Yeah, in cash, apparently.
Well, of course.
Yeah. And bank records show that on the afternoon of April 28th, likely after she left her parents' house, although I'm not exactly sure what time, Bonnie went to her bank and withdrew $15,075 in cash.
Why the $75?
So that was, I think she just withdrew, like wanted $75 for herself, like just to have.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I didn't know if that was like some sort of weird bank fee or something.
No, I think she just, got an extra 75 while she was there. So this obviously means that the police want to talk to Terry Christie.
I would hope so.
Who, wouldn't have been on their radar otherwise because they didn't even know that, like, Bonnie knew that guy.
Yeah.
So they went and paid him a visit, but he denied being in any sort of a relationship with Bonnie and said that he barely knew her. Basically was like, yeah, I mean, I'm a family friend. Like, I've met her, but I'm not in a relationship with her. And I definitely did not ask her for $15,000 to start a restaurant.
Okay.
And, apparently this first interview, they just like knocked on his door. It was very cordial. They were like, hey, do you mind if we take a look around? Because they're also at this point thinking that like maybe he's like bullshitting them about the relationship and like maybe like Bonnie and Jeremy are there and he's like hiding them away, not in like a nefarious kidnapping kind of way,
right?
But just in a like secret lover kind of way.
Yeah.
So they, they're like, hey, can we look around? And he agrees and they found nothing. At this point, investigators aren't really sure what they have on their hands. They're still thinking it's a possibility that Bonnie left of her own volition and that the $15,000 in cash was part of that. And they're also, again, thinking that maybe Terry's involved, but not in like a nefarious way, but,
somehow
something's going on here, right? Maybe he's still trying to keep the relationship a secret and he has plans to meet up with her later. Like, something along those lines. But as of now, there's no evidence of foul play.
Mm-hmm.
Bonnie's family, on the other hand, 100% believed, like immediately, that something terrible had happened to Bonnie and Jeremy. And this fear would only grow when something huge was found in the cash and carry parking lot on April 30th. Police found Bonnie's van.
So she did make it there.
Well, maybe. They find Bonnie's van. It's locked. And inside was Jeremy's diaper bag and Bonnie's purse. Her wallet contained $75. Jeremy's car seat and the $15,000 were gone. All right. So remember the deputy who didn't file the report and then went on vacation for 4 days?
Yeah. He's back now.
No, he's not. This is still day 2. Yeah, this is just the next day because she went missing on the 28th. She was last seen on the 28th. They called this deputy the evening of the 29th. And then this is the 30th that they find her van.
Okay.
So he's still gone. But when he does get back a couple of days later and realizes like, holy shit, this is like turned into a huge thing. He said that when he spoke to Bonnie's family and then spoke to the Creeches told him that Bonnie was going to the cash and carry to meet up with her boyfriend. I don't know if they told him who the boyfriend was. So he drove by the cash and carry just to see and says he did not see her van there.
Oh, interesting.
And according to Linda, the van was parked in a fairly visible space near the road. So if it had been there on the 29th, it would have been hard for the deputy to miss it. And assuming this deputy is telling the truth about going by there on the 29th, like that means that Bonnie's van did not appear in the cash and carry parking lot until after she had been missing for over 24 hours. Police processed the vehicle and checked for fingerprints. They also vacuumed for fibers, but nothing of interest was found. And remember, the car had just been cleaned earlier the day that Bonnie disappeared.
Right. They didn't even find any evidence of the boyfriend being in the car?
No. And Linda actually thinks that that's why Bonnie cleaned it, because she said that somebody, I forget who, I think it was like one of Bonnie's friends, had been in the van and been like, oh, what's that smell? It smelled like men's cologne. So Linda thinks that Terry Christie had been in the van and, it smelled like his cologne. And so she cleaned it so that nobody else would.
But before she went missing.
Right. In 2020, the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office did a podcast episode on Bonnie's case. In it, Detective Clay Hobelman, the lead investigator on the case at the time, described how the investigation changed once the van was found. And when I say at the time, I mean in 2020. He's a cold case detective. He said, quote, "It doesn't really kick up until her vehicle is found, obviously abandoned, locked up without her anywhere around it. That's not until the second day. During that second day, with that amount of information and with the continuing following the trail of where she might be from the first day, once they find that vehicle and realize she's no longer around the mode of transportation she did have to leave the day prior, then it becomes more of a suspicious missing person and where we would start considering her endangered," end quote. So I know that was a long kind of loopity way of talking. But basically, once they find her abandoned vehicle and her purse and the diaper bags in it, they're like, oh, maybe she didn't just drive away and take off.
Yeah. So that was a really long way of saying that finding the van triggered, it's a missing person case.
Yeah, exactly.
It was a very long way of saying that.
Right. So now investigators kick the investigation into gear and start interviewing more of Bonnie's friends and associates. But no one had much more information. Terry Christie obviously became a lot more interesting to investigators, but he stopped talking.
I'm not going to blame him for that.
Yeah. And also...
Don't talk to the police, ever.
And I think he did get a lawyer, which, again, also a good move, regardless of your guilt.
Regardless of how it looks.
Yeah. They asked him to take a polygraph, but he refused.
Mm-hmm.
And to this day... he hasn't spoken to police beyond that first interview.
And there's no evidence to compel him to speak either.
Exactly. And I don't know if police were ever able to access Terry's bank records to see if he had deposited any money. But the fact that he specifically asked for it in cash makes me doubt that he would have deposited it anyway.
Yeah.
But, this may come as a shock. He never did open a restaurant.
Weird. Did he buy a truck?
I don't think so. Detective Hobelman, who's the cold case detective, says that the main problem with this case is the lack of technology at the time of Bonnie and Jeremy's disappearance. The cash and carry didn't have surveillance cameras in the parking lot, and Bonnie didn't have a cell phone that could be traced, nor did Terry Christie, which is exactly what they would do if this happened today, right? They would try to track her movements. They'd track his movements, see if they matched up, they'd look for video surveillance in the parking lot, but they just didn't have those options. They were able to get CCTV footage of Bonnie making the bank withdrawal, but nothing of investigative importance was found on that. She was alone. It's not like Terry was with her at the bank or, anything like that. And unfortunately, as we see time and time again with cases that have little physical evidence, if people don't talk, it's easy for them to go cold. Yeah.
Yeah.
April 28th, 2023 was the 30th anniversary of Bonnie and Jeremy's disappearance. In that 30 years, Bonnie's family has accepted that their daughter is no longer alive. They believe that Jeremy was also murdered, but do allow for the possibility that whomever took them allowed Jeremy to live and be raised by someone else. Over the years, a few men have come forward claiming to be Jeremy, but DNA testing ruled them out.
Well, so it is interesting that his car seat was missing from the van.
Right.
And nothing else.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, his diaper bag was left there and her purse was. So, to me, what that shows is, because I'm guessing it's one of those baby carrier car seats where you just take the whole thing out.
Right.
And so if I'm Bonnie and I'm meeting somebody and they say, hey, come into my car, I'm taking out the carrier, I'm going into the car and leaving the rest of my stuff in my car because I think I'm only going to be here for a minute, giving you the money, talking, doing whatever.
Yeah.
But again, we don't know that this happened at the cash and carry parking lot.
Right.
We just know that
that's where her vehicle ended up.
Yeah. And that's where the Creeches said she had told them she was going. But, we have no verification of any of that. And to that point, Terry Christie is the obvious suspect in this case, but he's not the only one. As Unfound host Ed Densell points out in this episode, a lot of the information that Bonnie and the investigators have in this case came from the Creeches, and they're not necessarily reliable narrators. Remember, it was their family who tried to scam Bonnie right after she received her inheritance, and Mike Creech hadn't exactly been on the straight and narrow either before or since. And this is what I'm about to talk about, is like this realization that I had at the beginning of this episode. About a year prior to all of this, in May 1992, Mike Creech was arrested for misdemeanor battery. He was arrested on the same charge just after Bonnie's disappearance in July 1993. The 1992 charge was domestic violence. It's noted on the arrest record, but it's unclear if the 1993 charge was as well. The realization that I kind of came to is the broken arm.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, and I don't know, because I was thinking that that first arrest was a lot closer to this than it was. But on the YouTube video that Ed put up of this episode of Unfound, the first comment is from somebody claiming to be one of the Creech's sons.
Mm-hmm.
And he's like, yeah, it's so weird. I was a baby. I don't remember Bonnie, but it's like crazy that, my family was involved in this. And he's like, right before all this happened, my mom slipped in the shower and broke her arm. And then Bonnie came to live with us to help out.
Mm.
And so, yeah, I mean, I don't know. We don't know. That's, yeah.
Yeah.
He also says that, I don't know if it was him or, because I also saw a Reddit post from, I don't know if it's the same person or different, maybe the other son, saying that they don't have a relationship with their father anymore. So anyway, that's what's going on there. In 1998, Mike Creech was found guilty of grand theft third degree and dealing in stolen property. In 2003, he was convicted of petite theft. In 2007, he was found guilty once again of grand theft of a motor vehicle. He served a year in prison for that charge. In 2007, he was found guilty of a third offense. So it was like, 3 strikes kind of situation.
Yeah.
As well as possession of a controlled substance. He ended up serving an additional 2 years on those charges. He was released in 2012 and seems to have stayed out of trouble since then.
But nothing jumps out like he did it.
Yeah, absolutely. Like him stealing cars and potentially abusing his wife, yes, does not mean that he did anything to Bonnie and Jeremy. But I do think it's relevant to bring up just because, again, so much of the quote unquote facts that we have in this case
are from them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I think you just really have to take everything, with a huge grain of salt. But let's talk about Terry Christie. After Bonnie and Jeremy's disappearance, Linda said that she found out a lot more about this guy. Again, we're talking small town, right? So now everybody finds out about this secret relationship. And when they do, women from around the area with whom Terry had also had relationships came forward to Linda and shared that he used them in a similar way that it seems as though he was using Bonnie. And now Linda said that, basically, he had been promising Bonnie that, they were going to get married. And it just sounds like Bonnie was in love with this dude. She thought they were going to start a life together. And this is just what he did to women. And, a lot of women said that they had very similar situations with him.
And gave him money.
Right. Yeah. One shocking bit of information that came from that episode of Unfound is that it seems as though Terry may have been pressuring Bonnie into some form of sex work.
Oh.
Yeah, because this is something that Ed brings up to Linda. And so the thing about Ed, the host of Unfound, is that he had talked to other people prior to this interview. Like he had talked to Larry, but Larry didn't come on the show. So he referenced conversations that he had had with Larry and I think some other people. And So I think based on these outside conversations that he had asked Linda if she thinks that Bonnie was in sex work at all. And she kind of like dances around that a little bit, but says that since all this happened, and I think Linda's getting a lot of her information from like journals and things that Bonnie had left. Linda said that she had been reading up on Romeo pimps and that sounds like what Terry had been doing to Bonnie. For those of you who have never heard of this term.
I have never heard of this term.
Yeah. A Romeo pimp, or lover boy, as it's sometimes called, is a common tactic used in sex trafficking. According to a site dedicated to this from the government of the Netherlands, quote, lover boys or Romeo pimps are human traffickers who usually operate by trying to make young girls or boys fall in love with them. Sometimes they manipulate young people in other ways. Once they have victims under their influence, they exploit them, for instance, in the sex industry, end quote. Now, if you've heard about internet asshole Andrew Tate's recent arrest in Romania for human trafficking, this is basically what he was accused of doing, except he was doing it via social media. So he would meet young girls and women on social media and then basically end up convincing them that he was in love with them and would get them to work in pornography and things like that.
Got it.
Given the limited information we have about Bonnie and Terry, this dynamic could certainly have been in play. I mean, again, he's a much older man. Other women have come forward and said that, like, he, would promise all these things and then get money out of them. And so it definitely seems as though it's a possibility. It seems even more likely once you look into his criminal history. In 1990, Terry pleaded guilty to solicitation of prostitution. In 2000, he was arrested on 2 counts of solicitation of prostitution and 1 count of stalking. In 2006, he was arrested in Mississippi on a charge of false pretense, and I didn't know what that meant. So I looked it up, and according to Mississippi attorney Rufus Aldridge, quote, false pretense means obtaining a signature or thing of value by using a false document or other writing. The essential element of false pretense is using a document or other tangible writing to commit the fraud. If the value of the money or personal property obtained is large, the false pretense can be a felony. End quote.
So it's like forging checks or writing bad checks?
Yeah, I think something along, or like forging somebody's signature on loan documents would be another way.
Yeah.
Old Terry apparently skipped town on that one and was later arrested in Florida on a fugitive warrant. But he does seem to have stayed out of trouble since then. Again, none of that proves that he did anything to Bonnie and Jeremy, but you have solicitation of prostitution and fraud.
Uh-huh.
And you have a mother, a child, and $15,000 missing.
Right. And you have other women coming forward saying that he basically did the same thing to them to extort money out of them.
Exactly. We don't have much information. We just know that Bonnie was spending time around people who, did have criminal records and continue to have criminal records.
Yeah, who all wanted money out of her.
Right. And, there's also, not that anybody has really brought him up as a suspect, but like you also have this guy down the street who Bonnie says is the father of her child.
Right.
His family says
denies it outright that he medically can't.
He medically can't. But then, as Linda says, he actually did go on to have a baby with a woman years later. So
weird.
Yeah. So there's that. And maybe he wasn't the father. Ed does ask Linda if she thinks it's possible that Terry Christie was the father of Jeremy. She doesn't think so. But again, there's no DNA. We have no idea.
Right.
So we don't know if Jeremy's paternity, regardless of who it was, whether it's this kid, whether it's Terry, whether it's whoever, like could have been a possible motive. So yeah, you have that. You have the Creeches whose, family are asking them for money. Like it's just who's, not telling the full story of what's happening, right away. Like it's all kind of coming out in drips and drabs.
Uh-huh.
It's tough. I mean, Linda says, she's like, everyone's a suspect to me.
Yeah. I mean, it also doesn't help that it doesn't seem like the police did a whole lot of investigating initially.
No, they didn't. And by the time they did, there just really wasn't much they could find out, I guess.
I mean, do we know, did they search the Creech's house? That was her last known address.
Yeah, I don't know if the police searched it. I mean, it sounds like Linda ended up getting all of Bonnie's things. So, I don't know if it was like more of a family going over there and collecting her stuff. I'm sure the police looked around. I don't think any warrants were ever served in this case at all.
Yeah, that's kind of a big deal.
Yeah, and so that's the thing. We have no idea if Bonnie ever left the Creech's house that night of her own accord, right?
Yeah, I mean, they didn't alibi themselves in any way.
Yeah, I mean, they said, like, she told us she was going to the cash and carry. Her van was later found at the cash and carry, but, I mean, okay, did she?
Yeah, right.
Or is that something that they made up and then put the van there later to make it fit with their version of the story?
Right. Yeah.
I know that we give, shit to some of the investigators in these cases sometimes, who just basically seem to sit back and like wait for people to talk. But like,
there's not really
somebody does just have to talk.
I mean, especially at this point, there's nothing to go on. There is no evidence.
Yeah.
If they didn't find anything in the van, that's it. Perhaps back then, if they had done a more thorough search of the area, maybe they would have found something or done more investigative work at all. But at this point, there's nothing the cold case detectives can really do.
Yeah, except really just go back and interview every single person who knew Bonnie, really, and just hope that somebody wants to say something different,
Right.
The past 30 years have been incredibly difficult for the Dages family. In Linda's eyes, like I said, everyone is a suspect, and a lot of them still live in the area. So, she sees them.
That's got to be tough.
Yeah, Terry Christie apparently did move away. He lives in North Florida now, I guess. So she at least doesn't have to see him. But they're still around. Her big plea is for anyone who was around the Lithia, Florida area in 1993 and thinks they may know something, no matter how small, to come forward. Because people out there have information on Bonnie and Jeremy, whether they realize it or not. Someone coming forward really is the only way the Dages family will likely ever get answers in this case. At that 2019 press conference I mentioned at the beginning of the show, Linda and Bonnie's sister, Nancy Richardson, spoke about what their hopes are for this case.
Now, if whoever did this, whether it's the boyfriend, somebody else, whatever, if they're watching the news tonight and you could send them a message, what would you say to that person?
Help me here, because I don't want to say what I would like to say.
We want to find out what happened to Bonnie. That's the ultimate goal. The rest of that's between him and God.
Yeah.
Our goal is to know what happened to our sister. And we don't know. We have a lot of little pieces of the puzzle, but unfortunately, there's not that missing piece, and there's information, but there's more information out there that would finish it. And like you said, it might not be. There's so many what ifs that could possibly be the case. And that's it. We've accepted a long time ago something really bad probably happened to her, but we still don't know. And there's that little piece left that she might still be out there. And how do you quit until you know? Because she might still be out there.
And even if you know, and it's still something terrible, you can concentrate on that. You don't have to envision every single scenario out there. We want to know what happened to them. We would love to be able to bring them home, to have a burial for them, to have some sort of recognition. It's like...
Bonnie and Jeremy Dages have been missing from Brandon, Florida since April 28, 1993. Bonnie is a white woman with blonde hair and blue eyes. She is 5'6" and between 145 and 150 pounds at the time of her disappearance. She was last seen wearing a blue t-shirt, pink denim shorts, and white leather flip-flops. Bonnie has a large surgical scar on her abdomen and a scar on the shin of her left leg. Her ears are pierced. Bonnie was 18 when she went missing. She would be 48 today. Jeremy was 4.5 months old when he went missing. He would be 30 today. Anyone with information on the disappearance of Bonnie and Jeremy Dages is asked to call the Hillsborough County Sheriff's Office at 813-247-8200. You can also contact the family directly at 813-247-0546 or lcan250@yahoo.com. You can see all the sources for this episode along with photos and videos at our website, and thentheyweregone.com.
And be sure to follow us on social, and Then They Were Gone Pod on Facebook and at ATTWG Pod on Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter. If you like what we're doing, please subscribe and consider leaving a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts. It will help new listeners find us. And the more people that listen, the more chances we have of bringing someone home.
And we'll see you here next week for a brand new episode.
See you next week.
And Then They Were Gone is hosted by Kona Gallagher and Ethan Flick. All research, writing, and editing is done by me, Kona Gallagher. Theme music is The Stork by Ketsa. Additional music is provided by Kai Engel. And Then They Were Gone is a Little Monster production.
Hey, you can do it!